Thanks for joining us. I know that we know that many of you have been through almost a saturation of content, and that's a good thing because that's what you came here for, right? Is to learn. And at the same time, we thought, Ram and I, that we make best use of your time when we talk about the theory that you heard and affirm some things, but then also allow you to, as you're thinking about the ending of this session and going back home, equipping you with some very pragmatic 90-day next steps. The yin and the yang, right? The two sides of what it actually takes to win. And before I do that, just quickly so you know who we are. So Nagarro is a firm that is about $1 billion in size. We are global. We exist in 38 different countries. We have roughly 1,000 clients across sectors. We're pretty modest, which is why you probably don't hear as much about us. We try to let the customer, the clients, do the talking, and word of mouth is how we grow. At the same time, every so often, and this is one of those moments, we say if we actually think we have a fresh perspective to add, we'll talk, right? And so fortunately, we have the platform today. At the same time, if you look at the two folks who are up here on stage right now, Ram and I, we are inherently impatient, right? So on the one hand, we do want to share some provocative theory because we think the theory is useful, right? To provoke a different way of thinking about how do you get value from AI. So we'll do that. But conversely, our backgrounds, myself to start, both consulting and operations, having led global supply chain transformation and strategy for Nike, among others, for 10 plus years, as well as advising chief operating officers across different sectors at a boutique advisory firm called 0100. Along with Ram, who is the chief technology officer on the retail and consumer goods side of our business, both of us share this common experience, which is having sat in your shoes as well as advising, right? So Ram was a CIO for many years of a shoe company called Rockport. And the fancy language today that we use to describe people who actually get stuff done on the front lines is forward deployed engineer, right? Ram is my forward deployed engineer. He's the visionary, but also a doer, right? So that's how we come to you today.
An AI initiative, you are not going to get the benefit that companies are getting otherwise. So if you think about AI as a holistic problem, there is a better chance of success. There's a better chance of a higher ROI. And we have found stats to prove that don't try to take the first POC and run because you need to look at the holistic problem. And we'll come to that in a little bit more detail, but this just shows you the number that can hit you that if you don't look at it holistically, this is what is going to be the impact for you guys. And this is based on our experiences with companies, and we have got research to prove that too. So. Now, this is just to show that if you look at AI ROI, it's a very tough calculation, right? A lot of people have given numbers on AI ROI because obviously there's a process thing, there's a system thing, and people thing. It's very difficult to calculate ROI. But we have tried to a certain extent to do that, and the people part of it is the most important part of it, and you will beat the odds if you invest in the people. I mean, there is a conclusion that we will draw to it that do not try to make it a cost thing, make it a revenue thing, because at the end of the day, what you are supposed to be looking at is revenue growth. If you start with this model of cost optimization or cost reduction, you're already sub-optimized. You're not thinking about the growth of the company. So that is something I honestly tell CIOs and CDAOs that you need to start flipping it around and not talking about how much cost I can reduce, because the CEO is not interested in that. The CEO is interested in revenue. The CFO might be interested in a little bit of a cost reduction, which you will get, which is obvious. But to grow to 2x and not have double the employees, that itself is a great margin play in my mind.
Okay, but Ram, we're talking some theory and some big picture numbers. Is there a reality here that you can speak to?
Right. So we have a couple of cases that I put here. I think Nagarro has worked with certain companies, and we have seen the benefit in numbers. And this is one perfect example where there's a motorcycle rental company in Europe that has simple thing, 35% increase in new customer acquisition. And this is just because we have unified the dealers, customers, and the data into one platform. Simple, not too complicated. Obviously, over time, we are going to use AI models to build on that. But just unifying the data, this is very tangible, very relevant. You can measure it, customer acquisition before and customer acquisition after. Imagine what it would be in a few years when you now have a lot more AI models sitting on this data that you have mined from all the people that rent motorcycles that might later on buy these motorcycles. And this is another example where very easy to measure downtime in a factory. And by just getting people to start thinking about stuff holistically, we have achieved this in another manufacturing unit in India where the unplanned downtime, and this is not, this is not a number that you can fudge and show it to Wall Street or the exchanges. It is something that you can easily see in the factory that we have achieved 30% reduction in downtime. And obviously, we have this whole use cases that we can display, but some of what Steve was mentioning earlier, the people part of it plays a very important role in coming to these numbers.
So those are a couple of examples, and yet if we pull back up for a minute as well while looking at those specifics, which are crucial, one of the other things that we're observing in the trenches as well as from the perch, right, is that the notion of digital transformation on the one hand and the frameworks are not new, right? Excellence is still defined on one level by, if we're thinking about how do you actually get value from AI, right, which is the so what. There's some elements that are consistent, like start with a really big vision and make sure that it's clear and aligned, do a bunch of agile pilots, and then figure out through very careful, thoughtful architecture, right, and governance, and so on, how you scale quickly and effectively, right? That's hopefully, for the folks in the room, that's not brand new thinking, right? But what is different, back to some of those earlier stories we shared, and this is what we want to highlight, is a couple of things. One is thinking back to that grandfather talking to Kleibo, right? When you're imposing, or I shouldn't say imposing, before you even think about imposing, when you are deploying, say, in the classic digital world, what do we deploy? We deploy CRM systems, we deploy ERP, sometimes some advanced analytics, right? But usually, what are we looking at? We're looking at software that has often embedded in it a process best practice, right? So you're layering it on and trying to maneuver the organization through careful change management to a business outcome aligned to and compliant with what's already, the process that's already in the software. This is the inverse, right? And so this is the first point. When we're talking about intelligence, right? So whether you're talking about the examples that Ram just gave, or someone downstream in merchandising or in finance, it doesn't matter. When we're talking about artificial intelligence, the way to get value is actually to reverse that logic. Don't assume the best practice is already codified in some piece of software. The best practice is codified when we're talking about intelligence in the human brain, right? So it actually comes out with a completely different sequence. Those who are winning are starting by asking the question, what is the friction? What are the specific blockers of the existing latent intelligence in the organization? And how can we use then downstream, how can we manipulate our process designs? And then finally, our systems and data to be able to make that person successful, right? That's a different way of thinking from conventional digital transformation. It's not that the conventional approach is wrong, but it's missing this one piece. Now, what's the other takeaway from the last couple of days of the conference? Speed, right? Everything's happening super fast. So we can't necessarily, just by speeding up the clock on this process, get to keep pace with the kinds of changes that we're all experiencing in artificial intelligence, right? So the other thing is that when you take this process, it's an and this approach, what you're doing is not only figuring out how to unlock human intelligence, but you're also freeing teams to do what's absolutely necessary to keep pace with this accelerating rate of technology change. Because what happens if you're that planner, say, and this is my Nike experience, right, where at one point when I was doing a digital transformation of our planning processes, we had 800 planners across the globe. When you have 800 planners that are distributed across the globe, and they're being told, hey, I want you to automate a particular forecasting process, right? then there's a good chance you're going to be behind, because by the time you finish automating that narrow process, you're actually boxing somebody in. You're telling them this is how you do it within this little box. But if you're actually looking holistically at intelligence and unlocking it across people, process, and tech, the teams are having a different dialogue. They're saying, yeah, we got to automate the thing and drive efficiency, but we also have to redesign the thing, because the way that technology capability is accelerating means that we have to be prepared not just to implement, but to second guess even the way we did things yesterday, right? So taking that approach has that other benefit. We call this whole thing fluidic intelligence. The notion of fluidic is that you're taking friction and moving it to flow. Now, again, pivoting back and forth between theory and actual, right? So we were working with one of the world's largest cosmetics brands, and we continue to, by the way, in this case. And indeed, this was a planning example, so close to home for me, but also for us, where forecasters were being told to try to figure out how to improve forecast accuracy with a target of 20% improvement, which is ambitious, right? And at the same time, does forecast accuracy excite customers? Does it excite Wall Street? No, right? Those are great tactical optimization opportunities, but what we did with them is reframe the conversation, just like we were talking about before, and we said, you've got some really smart planners throughout the globe, but you're also stuck with a lot of excess inventory, and your merchants are sandwiched in between. So what if we reframe this as a working capital efficiency project, knowing that for you to continue to innovate your products, you have to funnel cash back into the business. Different conversation. Suddenly, planners were not just asked to plan, but they were asked to think strategically, right? And what we did was technologically then say, take the best of, right? So data governance, driving a consistent approach to enabling these systems with data, clean data, but then also leveraging artificial intelligence, both agentic and classic AI, to equip planners as well as their upstream and downstream partners with a consolidated what-if analysis that allowed them to reduce inventory consistently over time. So we zoomed way out while also automating the thing.
So a couple of things on the earlier slide. So the people friction is the one that is the most important, because again, you go to an SAP and they say, we got the process fixed. We go to systems, you got SI that will tell you we can implement any system possible in the world. And now with technology and all the chip speed and all that, that thing is solved. The people friction is the one that is the most important. And that's the other thing. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the work definition has changed. So you don't have these job descriptions of an AP analyst saying he needs or she needs to do these 16 things. It's changing by the day. This morning, what he talked about is this job description. I don't even know who do you hire for a job description that's changing. So the definition of work completely being changed every single day. I don't know what it would be tomorrow, but that's just 2 points that on the earlier slide. This particular example is of an airport where we had the challenge of trying to sub-optimize and do some problem solving across multiple terminals and multiple gates. We took the whole airport as an example to achieve this level of operational efficiency. And that's what I mean if you take small problems and try to fix them, you're not solving the bigger problem, and you need to look at it holistically. So this is an airport example that we really were able to showcase 20% operational efficiency by looking at it holistically.
Excellent. So, okay, we promised you also in the last few minutes a 90-day plan, right? So we are pivoting from theory and case study to what are you going to go do at your desk? There's probably 30 things that you took, right? But we want to offer 5 that we know from experience is a great way to either get started or maintain momentum in this new construct that we're describing. And so 5. Why 5? Because focus is also powerful, right? So if we had more time, we'd probably come up with a longer list, but I actually think these are the essentials that if I were to offer 5. But also not just questions, but hacks, right? So solutions. And so as we mentioned, right? So there is some wisdom in sticking with what works, right? So digital transformation, AI, although all these differences that we just highlighted are crucial, right? It still works off of a strategy to execution process, which starts with a clear vision, fast drumbeat on the pilots, and then scale. So the hacks, if you will, and the questions are in that context, but specific to the problem that we just defined. So on the vision side, question number one for you, and you can answer it now or when you go back to your desk, is can everyone on your team articulate in the same way, by the way, how what you're working on, in particular, say if you're a data scientist or you're a CIO, doesn't matter what your role is, on a particular initiative and project, can you pull up and say, if we're driving, say, inventory reduction, another example, or if the CFO said, what's most important right now is we compete on cost, or revenue growth is the thing, right, for the next 2 years, can you actually point to that specific initiative and draw a straight line to those outcomes? If yes, awesome, but you're in the minority. Right, so the hack here is, how many, just a quick show of hands, have heard this fancy term PRFAQ? 0, wow, that's interesting. So Amazon uses this mechanism, which is really transferable across organizations, has pre-AI and also continues to, which is essentially an assignment to the teams who haven't necessarily answered that first question to look at a problem statement and define a press release in the future, PR, right, that is in customer terms, but also CFO terms, that says, this is what the experience is going to look like 3 years from now when we're done with this initiative that matters to the customer. Less is more. Sometimes this is 1 page, right? But can you actually write that? If so, then you're winning. But that's an exercise and a tool that I recommend. 2, okay, that's a very quick dive into vision, but what about the pilots, right? So what's the differentiator between winners and those who are chasing? Well, another question that the winners answer is, where is friction, to use that same term, within a particular zone within the value chain, but also across? Specifically, in this case, we're talking about intelligence, right? So friction that is felt by humans, right? That if we were to change it and remove it, we could translate very explicitly to dollars and cents, right? So that's the second thing. And another tool that we really like to use within Nagarro is basically a simple what-if simulation. To say, if you look backwards in time at a decision that was made, say last season, last quarter, had you had this new tool, how much could you have saved? How much could you have gained? That simple exercise is a hugely powerful driver of not just insight, but also alignment and backing from those who really control the purse strings. So having that systematic approach to what if, modeling the backwards, and then assess, and then building a more robust business case is the difference that often distinguishes winners from also-rans.
The third one is, do you have a consistent framework? And framework is a little bit of a vague word because what you want to really, across the organization, and this is a little bit different, how would you present to VCs? I know you don't present all of your projects to VCs and say, give me approval for money, right? But VCs are the toughest guys to please when you want money, more than the CFO. The CFO might say, you know what, below $1 million, don't come to me. But VCs will look at every single dollar you spend. So it's almost like you look at a project, build a framework that you can build an ROI for, assuming or making an assumption that there is a VC at the other end of it. So this is a readiness value matrix that you need to prepare. It could be different for different companies. You could call it differently. But if you can please a VC, according to my logic of a VC, but I don't know, if you're a large company, you don't have that VC, but that could be people working in the finance department. That could be those folks that might look at the number and say, yes, this is a good project to go ahead with. Even if it fails, as long as VCs are known 9 out of 10 risks they take, that's failure. But if you can convince them those are the 10 opportunities that you want to go after, that's a good framework.
And the sort of the meta point here is just to emphasize it is focus, right? So more projects does not equal more value. This is a tool that allows you to pick those vital few.
And this doesn't mean all projects will be successful. It's just that you had a framework, and 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 might be successful. You might have a couple of failures, but at least you are using the same framework, and there's a better chance of knowing what the reasons were for success is there because of the framework that you started with. And then scale. Obviously, scale is the most important thing in everything. We do POCs, we look happy and all that, and then the CFO says, now scale and show me the value to it. So the last two questions are those. And People do not like to measure scale because people say POC was successful. That's great. Everybody's happy, you have a party and all that. But when you scale is when the ROI is calculated. And this is where you need to be very honest about your dashboard. And we have seen companies that do not like a dashboard because it shows the failures. There are going to be a lot of AI failures. Everybody is starting fresh with many, many challenges that they have. Have an honest dashboard. Those 3 things that I mentioned here, those are very important for you to show in the dashboard. It's not a reflection of this person is not doing well because he has got 4 failures and 4 things in red. If you're honest from pilot to scale, I think everybody will understand it's just a dashboard that's constantly updated. It's not something that is good or bad. It is something that you're honestly feeding back to the system that these are the reasons why something did not work out, and then doing it right the next time. And this, I think, one of the key things that Steve brings up, this change management. This is something that if you have done a large implementation, it's something at the bottom of the SOW. How much effort are you putting in change management? You almost, because of the people friction thing, have to flip it to put change management at the top. Because there is going to be massive change management that is going to be happening in any of these AI projects. Nothing compared to what you have done in SAP. SAP was, if you did SAP, the amount of change management was not much. This is going to be huge. Because you are targeting the people friction, the human intelligence aspect of it. And it's not very easy to systematically tell people that you need to come up with this idea or you don't need to get trained on this and now you can build the models yourself. So the hack is momentum is the most important KPI. You put people at the center of it, they start celebrating what they have done, and your human intelligence keeps growing up and up. And I think this is something that we don't do enough of. Even if you fail, if there are people that can be celebrated, do that. This is a very dynamic area where you can say, I did a good job, I did a bad job, but celebrate early and visibly.
Yeah, you're potentially technicians, right, most likely, but you're also viral marketers, right, is kind of the point. So celebration has intentionality amongst the leaders. And so with that, I think that's where we're at, right? You should consider yourselves worthy of, I'm guessing you do, but worthy of celebration, right? But your teams as well. Coming to this conference puts you in the minority, right? And you're showing the kind of inquisitiveness that is a leading indicator for what we're talking about here. And so congrats to you as well, but thank you for listening, and we appreciate your time.